Continuing on notes for 8.4, here we are at example 5. The second one, we finished with the first one on the last recording. So this next one here, notice the amplitude is 1, so that would be a 1 in front of the sign. And then there's a half of a cycle from 0 to 2 pi. So this number 1/2 would go right there. Next one, the amplitude or the height of it is a half. So this time the half would go in front of the trig function. And there are 1, 2 cycles between 0 and 2 pi. So a 2 goes right there. On this one, think about it for a second. Okay, what's the amplitude? 2, and it goes right here. And then how many cycles are there in 2 pi? So there's 1, 2, 3. So a 3 goes right here. The next part, we are to graph the following sine functions based on the descriptions. So we want there to be an amplitude of 2 and one period is 4 pi units long. So, and it's sine, so we're going to start at 0, 0, and it's going to have one complete revolution or one complete period before we get to 4 pi. So that means it's going to go up to 2, and then halfway is going to be at 2 pi, go down to -2, and then back to 4 pi. So that's what the graph would look like for that one. The next one has an amplitude of 4 and a period of 2. This should be, let's see. On that last one, I forgot to mention that there was a pi left off. So this one also too should be 2 pi. And so then it has an amplitude of 4 and one cycle of 2 pi. So that means it's going to go up to 4, halfway it's going to go down here and to right there. So one cycle is at 2 pi. And now we're on to the second page of notes, which is just some more graphing. So we're going to graph at least one cycle of 3 sine of 2x. So let's start with the amplitude. The amplitude is the number in front of the trig function, so it has an amplitude of 3. The 2 is the number of cycles, so it's going to have 2 cycles from 0 to 2 pi. So a period is then going to be 1 pi, because if you take 2 pi and divide it by b2, that gives you 1 pi. So there's going to be 2 cycles from 0 to 2 pi, so it would look like this. It's going to have 1 go up to 3 and down, and I'm kind of goofing up there, and then another one comes up and down and back up. So you have 2 complete cycles when you get to 2 pi. Hopefully your graphs look a little better than mine. On this one, we have a negative sign. So instead of going up, it's going to go down. And one cycle, so the amplitude is still 1 because we take the absolute value of it. The cycle is going to be the pi over 2, because that's our b. And the period, so you think about the period is 2 pi divided by b, which is pi over 2. And so that's multiplied by 2 over pi, which then the pi's cancel out, and 2 times 2 is 4. So it is 4, which I guess if you'd have graphed it, you could also have seen that too, because every half of a pi, you're going to have a cycle. So it's going to go down and up to a half a pi, and down and up and down to 2 pi's and down and up and down to 3/4 and there. So we have 4 cycles from 0 to 2 pi. Amplitude of 2. And if you need to pause the video so you can think about it before I just tell you the answer, I don't mean to steal your thunder. So cycles are 1/3. And the period, so I'm going to use the formula again. 2 pi divided by 1/3 is multiplying by a 3/1. So a period is 6 pi. So that means we're going to have to go all the way out here to 6 pi. 4 pi and 6 pi. And that is 1 period. There is 1/3 of a cycle from 0 to 2 pi, which makes sense because if it takes that far to get out to 6 pi, of course, there was only 1/3 of it there. So, and it is positive, it does go up. So I'm just going to kind of find the midpoint. So the midpoint is right there. So I know it has to go up to 2, and then it's going to cross right there, go down to -2, and back up. And there we have the graph. Okay, next one, because it's negative, we know we're going to go down. The amplitude is 1/2. So we're going to be halfway between, so about right there and there. The cycle is pi, and the period would be, well, 2 pi divided by pi would just be 2. So we're going to go down, and we're just going to go halfway. And one cycle is going to be 2 pi. So we're going to go down, and then up, and down, up, and down again. And notice that from between 0 and 2 pi, we had 2 complete periods. And there was a complete cycle made from 0 to pi. It was pi units long. All right, now we're moving on to cosine. And cosine, if you remember, related kind of to sine, but first we're going to look at what it looks like to graph and look at our values for this. So if we just grab a calculator and plug these values in. So I'm going to do that really quick. And voila, you get those answers. You could have also looked at the unit circle, which would have been an awesome way to do that. And what we want to look at here is, what is the y-intercept? What are the cycles? How many cycles from 0 to 2 pi? What's the period? What's the amplitude? So just kind of think about that for a second. What do you think is going to happen with the cosine? Is it going to be an inverse of the sine? What exactly is going to happen there? Well, let's plot the points and see. So we have 0, 1. At pi halves, it's 0. At pi, it's -1. At 3/2 pi, it's back up to 0. And at 2 pi, it is back up to 1. So we have one complete cycle from 0 to 2 pi. So that's where we put a 1 right there. The period goes from 0 to 2 pi. So the period is 2 pi units long. The amplitude is 1. The height was 1. And so that's cosine. So it's kind of similar to sine. It's not an inverse of it, but it's kind of a shift of it. So if we shifted the sign, then we would get cosine. So identify the amplitude, period, and number of cycles from 0 to pi. Then we're going to write the equation. So this goes from 8 down, so the amplitude is 8. The period goes from here back up to here is pi. And the number of cycles is 2. So now we could write our equation because A and B is going to be the same as when we were doing the sine functions. It's just that this time we write cosine of 2x or 2 theta. Amplitude is 4. A period goes from 0 to pi, so it's pi units long. And there are 2 complete cycles from 0 to 2 pi. So our equation will be y equals 4 cosine 2x. Next one, amplitude. It's halfway between 4 and 5, so the amplitude, between 4 and 6, so 5. The period goes from here to here, so it's 2 pi long, and there is 1 cycle from 0 to 2 pi, so our equation would be y equals 5 cosine of 1x, or just cosine of x. Sketching the graph. So we're going to use the same information that we used with our sine function to help us out here. So I'm just going to look at the equation and write the information down first. I always start with the amplitude. The amplitude is 3 units high. Then I look at 4 theta. That means there's 4 cycles between 0 and 2 pi. And so that means a period. And, again, think about 2 pi being divided by 4 would then be pi over 2. So we're going to have a cycle every pi halves. And I probably should have made my graph a little bit bigger, but we can do this. So every line here, I'm going to have a complete cycle that goes from 3 down to -3 and all the way back up again. And there's another one, and I'm back up again, and 3 and 4. On this one, it's the -2, so our amplitude is still going to be 2, so I'm going to mark it off right here. I have a +2, and down here a -2. Our cycle is pi. Our period is going to be 2 pi divided by pi, which is just going to be 2. So that means from 0 to 2 pi, I'm going to have 2 complete periods, and every pi over, I'm going to have a cycle. Now it's negative cosine, so instead of starting up here, I'm going to start down here. And I go up, and at halfway, it's right there, and then it comes down here, and then halfway, it's back up to the top, and then it comes down here, and it ends right there. Sketch the graph of the following. The amplitude is 4. There are 3 cycles, and this time, I think of 2 pi divided by 3 to tell me what the period is, and it's 2 pi over 3. Or in other words, there's 3 cycles between 0 and 2 pi. This might get a little tricky, but we're not going to sweat that it's not going to be perfect. So we have going to 2 pi. So every 2/3 of the way, I'm going to have a complete cycle. So think of breaking this apart into 2/3. I'm just going to put a little mark right there. That's 2/3. And then 1/3, about right. Let's see. Another one maybe right here, and close enough. Okay, it is 4, so we start up here, and we want to be back up.